Billionaire got home early, caught wife slapping maid's daughter. His reaction left everyone stunned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Richard Clark, a self-made billionaire, was a man of incredible power and wealth. His name was synonymous with success. At the head of a global empire, he had everything one could imagine: luxurious homes, exotic cars, and an office that looked out over the skyline of New York City. Yet, for all his accomplishments, there was one thing that had always eluded him: his family. After years of long hours spent building his business, Richard's marriage had begun to crumble. His wife, Rebecca, was a woman of beauty and elegance, yet their relationship had become distant. He had become a stranger in his own home, a shadow who only saw his wife and children in passing. On this particular evening, Richard had made a rare decision to return home earlier than usual. The air in the house felt still as he walked through the front door, the large chandelier above him glimmering in the soft light. He had expected to find his wife in the study, working on her latest charity event, but instead, he heard voices coming from the living room. Intrigued, he quietly walked down the hallway, peering into the large, open space. What he saw left him stunned. Rebecca, his wife, stood towering over Mia, the maid's daughter, with a cruel expression on her face. Richard had never seen his wife so angry before. Mia, a young girl no older than 16, stood trembling in the middle of the room, her face flushed from the slap she had just received. Rebecca's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. You think you can just waltz around here like you own the place? You're nothing but a maid's daughter. Know your place. Mia's eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't cry. She was used to being treated poorly by the wealthy family she worked for, but something about this moment struck a nerve. It was as if Rebecca's harsh words were meant to remind Mia of her place, to make her feel small and insignificant. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, watching in disbelief as his wife's words stung Mia. He had never known Rebecca to be this cruel, especially not to someone so young and vulnerable. He felt a strange pang in his chest, a sense of guilt that he had allowed his wife to behave this way for so long without intervening. Richard had always been focused on his business, letting Rebecca handle the household and the staff. But this moment forced him to confront the reality of his own neglect. He had failed to protect Mia, and he had failed to see the tension building in his own home. As the seconds ticked by, Richard made a choice. His heart raced as he stepped forward into the room. The sound of his footsteps broke the silence, and both Rebecca and Mia turned to face him. Rebecca's face softened slightly when she saw her husband, but her expression was still one of irritation. Mia, on the other hand, quickly lowered her gaze, too afraid to look him in the eye. Richard took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his control, his ability to handle any situation with calm precision. But now, in the face of this injustice, he felt a surge of emotion that he couldn't ignore. Rebecca, Richard's voice was calm but firm, cutting through the tension. What's going on here? Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by his sudden presence. I was just trying to teach her some discipline, she stammered. Richard's gaze narrowed. Discipline? By slapping her? Is that what you think is appropriate? Rebecca's face flushed with anger, but Richard held his ground. He had never raised his voice, but the weight of his words was undeniable. He looked at Mia, his heart heavy with the realization of how much he had overlooked. Mia, are you okay? Mia nodded slowly, still afraid to speak. Richard's heart broke as he looked at the young girl, standing there in front of him, her dignity shattered. But in that moment, something shifted. Richard made a vow to himself that things were going to change. He would no longer stand by and let his wife's cruelty go unchecked. As he stood there, with Rebecca's eyes filled with rage and Mia's silent tears, Richard knew this was the turning point. He had to take action, for Mia's sake, for his family's sake, and for his own. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would never allow anyone, not even his own wife, to treat Mia, or anyone else, with such disdain ever again. Richard's eyes locked with Rebecca's, the tension in the room so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. His voice was steady, but beneath the calm exterior, there was a storm brewing. "This stops now," he said, his gaze piercing. Rebecca stood frozen for a moment, disbelief written all over her face. She had expected him to side with her, as he always had. But this time was different. Richard's silence had finally given way to action. Mia, still standing in the middle of the room, kept her head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The room felt too large, too cold for a young girl who had spent her entire life trying to remain invisible. Rebecca finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with resentment. "What's your problem, Richard? I'm just teaching her some discipline." Richard's lips tightened as he took a step forward, his posture commanding. "That's not discipline, Rebecca. That's abuse." The words were harsh, but they were necessary. They cut through the air, leaving Rebecca stunned. "You've been treating her like she's invisible, like she's not even human. I won't stand for it anymore." Mia flinched slightly at the sound of Richard's voice, and for a moment, Richard softened. He turned to her, his expression changing from anger to concern. "Mia, are you okay?" Mia's voice was barely a whisper as she nodded, still not daring to look up. Her heart pounded in her chest, unsure of how to react to the sudden shift in her world. Richard looked back at Rebecca, his eyes hardening once more. "From now on, you will treat Mia with respect. If I ever see you do this again, you'll regret it." His words were final, leaving no room for argument. Rebecca's face twisted with fury, but she remained silent. The woman who had always been in control of her world now stood powerless in front of Richard. Richard took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. It was not just about Mia anymore. It was about the brokenness of his marriage, the neglected truth that had been lurking beneath the surface. He had been so focused on his empire, on building something that would outlast him, that he had forgotten the very people he was supposed to protect. He turned to Mia again, his expression softening. "You're not just a maid's daughter. You matter, and I'm sorry for what you've had to endure." For the first time since he had entered the room, Mia's eyes met his. Her gaze was full of uncertainty, but also something else. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. Rebecca's anger was still simmering, but she didn't dare challenge Richard. The room was heavy with the aftermath of what had just transpired. Richard knew that he had to take responsibility for his actions, or lack thereof, if he was to fix the damage he had caused. "I'll make sure you're treated right from now on, Mia. You deserve that, and I promise it won't happen again." Mia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She couldn't believe it. For the first time, someone had stood up for her. Someone had seen her, really seen her. And in that moment, everything seemed to shift. Rebecca stood there, silent and defeated. She had no choice but to accept Richard's words. She could feel the walls closing in on her, her authority slipping through her fingers. Richard looked at her one last time, his words cold and final. "You'll change, Rebecca, or this marriage is over." With that, Richard turned and walked toward the door. He had made his decision. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would no longer tolerate the mistreatment of those who worked for him. Mia's life was about to change, and Richard knew he would do whatever it took to make it right. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, he was willing to fight for something that truly mattered. The next few days passed in a strange, tense silence. Richard's words echoed in his mind, but as he walked through the house, everything felt different. The rooms that had once seemed so familiar now felt foreign. He was no longer the same man who had come home early that fateful evening. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. Rebecca, too, had fallen silent. Her usual cold, condescending demeanor had been replaced with a strange stillness. She no longer commanded the house the way she used to. For the first time in years, Richard felt like he was in control. But it wasn't easy. Mia's presence in the house had grown in subtle ways. She no longer kept her head down or avoided eye contact. Her posture had changed. She walked a little taller now, and though she was still reserved, there was a new confidence in her step. Richard noticed it. It made him proud, but also deeply saddened. Mia had been through so much, and yet, she still had so much potential to offer. The change in Rebecca, however, was more subtle. Richard could see the cracks in her facade. She no longer treated Mia with the same cold indifference, but it wasn't out of kindness. It was out of necessity. Rebecca was still resentful, still angry that Richard had stood up to her. But Richard knew that her resentment was nothing compared to the deep shame she would eventually feel. He had made his position clear, and she was forced to comply. Richard spent the next few days with Mia, trying to make amends for his neglect over the years. He asked her questions, learned about her hopes and dreams, and did his best to make her feel heard. Mia had always been quiet, always kept to herself, but Richard could see the spark of intelligence and creativity in her. She was smart, capable, and strong. He began to realize that he had been wrong all these years, treating her as invisible. She wasn't just a maid's daughter. She was a person who deserved respect, dignity, and a future. One afternoon, Richard decided to do something about it. He took Mia aside and sat her down in the library, a place he rarely visited. "Mia," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I know things haven't been easy for you here, but I want to change that. You deserve an education. You deserve opportunities, and I am going to help you get them." Mia looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. But I'm just the maid's daughter." "I don't think I can," Richard interrupted her gently. "You're not just anything. You are capable of so much more than you've been allowed to show. I've seen your potential, and I want to help you unlock it. From now on, you'll have access to the best schools, the best tutors, and everything you need to succeed. Don't let anyone, not even me, tell you that you can't." Mia's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she let herself cry. She had never allowed herself to dream of a life beyond her circumstances, but in that moment, she realized that it was possible. Richard stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are worth so much more than this place, Mia. You are worth everything." In that moment, a new chapter began for both of them. Richard knew that he had to fight for Mia's future. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was committed. For the first time in years, he had found something to fight for that was more important than money or business deals. He had found a purpose, but the road ahead would not be without its challenges. Rebecca was still a problem, and her resentment would not be easily quelled. Richard knew that he had a long way to go before things were truly different. But one thing was clear. The balance of power had shifted, and Richard was no longer just a man building an empire. He was a man building a future for someone who deserved it. And he would fight for it, no matter what. The days following Richard's decision were filled with a mixture of hope and tension. Richard kept his promise to Mia, ensuring that she had access to the finest education he could provide. He arranged for private tutors, enrolled her in one of the best schools in the city, and made sure she had every opportunity to succeed. For the first time in her life, Mia felt like she had control over her future. The girl who had once been invisible in her own home was now thriving, and it was all thanks to Richard's belief in her. But as Mia blossomed, the atmosphere at home became more strained. Rebecca's resentment toward Richard's actions grew stronger by the day. She had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the rules of their home, and Richard's decision to help Mia had turned that balance upside down. She resented the fact that Richard had taken a stand, not only for Mia but for the entire staff. She had always seen them as beneath her, and the idea that one of them could be given such opportunities made her feel small. As days turned into weeks, the tension between Richard and Rebecca grew. They no longer spoke to each other unless absolutely necessary. The bond they once shared was now a distant memory, replaced by silent dinners and cold exchanges. Richard didn't mind the silence. He knew that he was doing the right thing by helping Mia. He knew that he couldn't allow the abuse of power to continue, even if it meant losing his marriage. He had made peace with that. One evening, as Richard sat alone in his study, he received an unexpected phone call. It was Mia's school principal. "Mr. Clark, I wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done for Mia. She's not only excelling academically, but she's also shown an incredible amount of leadership. She's become a role model for the other students, and we couldn't be more proud of her." Richard felt a wave of pride wash over him. He had known Mia was capable of greatness, but hearing it from her school principal made it real. "Thank you," Richard replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm just giving her the opportunities she deserves." The principal chuckled. "You've done more than that, Mr. Clark. You've changed her life." That night, as Richard sat in his study reflecting on the conversation, he couldn't help but think about the changes in Mia. She was no longer the quiet, invisible girl she had been when she first came into his life. She had blossomed into someone confident, someone who could stand up for herself and make a difference. He realized that in helping her, he had unknowingly helped himself. Mia had reminded him of what truly mattered: compassion, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. As the days went on, Richard made more decisions that would challenge the status quo in his home. He began to spend less time in his office and more time with Mia. He took her to meetings, introduced her to important people in his life, and made sure she knew that she was an equal in his eyes. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much he had neglected his own family. The shift in his priorities was undeniable. It wasn't just Mia's life that had changed, it was his as well. And although Rebecca continued to seethe in silence, Richard knew that the changes he had made were for the better. He wasn't just building an empire. He was building something much more important: a legacy of kindness, fairness, and opportunity. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Richard was no longer the man he used to be. He had learned, through his actions and his mistakes, that true success was measured not by the size of his wealth, but by the lives he touched along the way. As weeks passed, Richard found himself increasingly focused on his newfound mission to make things right for Mia. She continued to excel in school, impressing her teachers and peers with her intelligence, dedication, and compassion. The other students looked up to her, and Richard couldn't help but smile every time he saw her walk through the door with her head held high. Mia had transformed from the quiet, timid girl she once was into a confident young woman who had a bright future ahead of her. Richard knew that he had made the right choice in helping her, but deep down, he also understood that his actions had changed more than just Mia's life. They had changed his own. He started to see the world around him differently. He spent more time with his children, taking them to dinner, to parks, and even attending school events he had once skipped out on. The truth was, for so long, he had been consumed with his business empire that he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered: his family. Rebecca, on the other hand, remained bitter and resentful. The tension in the house was palpable, and despite Richard's efforts to make things work, the cracks in their marriage only grew wider. She no longer fought with him outright, but there was an undeniable distance between them. Richard had stopped trying to fix things with her. He had made it clear that his priorities had shifted. His commitment to Mia was unwavering, and as time went on, he found himself questioning whether he could continue living in a marriage that had become so hollow. One evening, after a long day at the office, Richard returned home to find Mia sitting alone in the living room, her book open but her mind clearly elsewhere. She looked up as he entered, a faint smile appearing on her face. "Hi, Mr. Clark," she said quietly. "How was your day?" Richard sat beside her, his tired eyes softening. "It was good. Busy but good. How about you? How was school?" Mia shrugged but then looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and concern. "School's great. I'm actually starting to enjoy it more now, but," she hesitated, biting her lip. "I think I've been thinking a lot about things, about everything that's happened. I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. I never thought anyone would care enough to give me a chance like this." Richard's heart tightened as he listened to her words. He had known that Mia would struggle with these changes, but hearing her express her feelings so openly struck him in a way he hadn't expected. "Mia," Richard began, his voice gentle but filled with emotion, "you don't have to thank me. You deserve all of this and more. You've always been capable of greatness. I just gave you the chance to show it." Mia smiled, but her eyes were filled with unshed tears. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in. I guess I just needed someone to believe in me." Richard took a deep breath, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. He had done more than just help Mia. He had changed her life, and in doing so, he had changed his own. He no longer cared about the superficial things that had once consumed him. Money, power, and status seemed insignificant compared to the bond he had built with Mia. In that moment, he realized that what he was doing wasn't just about helping a young girl escape her circumstances. It was about building something meaningful, something that went beyond business deals and boardroom meetings. As Richard looked at Mia, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. His marriage with Rebecca was still hanging by a thread, but Richard had made his choice. He had chosen to fight for what was right. And as long as Mia's future was secure, as long as she had the chance to thrive, Richard knew that his own happiness, though complicated, had been found in the most unexpected way. As time went on, Richard's relationship with Mia continued to grow stronger, but the atmosphere in the house remained tense. Rebecca's coldness had become unbearable, and despite Richard's efforts to maintain peace, the cracks in their marriage were becoming more and more apparent. He found himself questioning whether it was worth trying to salvage a relationship that seemed so broken. He had done everything he could for Mia, and he had made it clear to Rebecca that he was no longer willing to tolerate the disrespect towards her. But despite his attempts to make things work, Rebecca remained distant, cold, and resentful. One evening, after another silent dinner, Richard sat alone in his study, deep in thought. He had made a decision. He could no longer live in a marriage where both partners were unhappy. His priority was now Mia, and he knew that to truly help her, he needed to be in a home where she could thrive, surrounded by love and understanding. It was time to make a change. The next day, Richard sat down with Mia and explained everything to her. "Mia," he began, his voice calm but filled with emotion, "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I've come to realize something. I can't continue living in a marriage that isn't working. You deserve a home where you feel supported, loved, and respected. And I can't give that to you if I'm still trying to fix a broken relationship." Mia's eyes widened, and she could see the pain in his expression. "Does this mean you're going to leave?" she asked quietly. Richard nodded. "I think it's time for both of us to move on. I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. I'll make sure you have everything you need to succeed, and I'll do everything I can to ensure that you have a future filled with possibilities." Mia's heart swelled with emotion. She had never imagined that her life could be so different, so full of hope. Richard had not only changed her life, but he had also given her the courage to believe in herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "You've already given me more than I could have ever dreamed of." Over the next few weeks, Richard made arrangements for his separation from Rebecca. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. They lived in the same house for a while, but the tension was unbearable. Finally, Richard moved out, finding a smaller place where he and Mia could live peacefully. It wasn't perfect, but it was a fresh start. Mia enrolled in a new school, where she continued to excel academically. She was no longer the shy, invisible girl she had once been. She was confident, driven, and determined to make the most of the opportunities Richard had given her. As Richard settled into his new life, he realized that while the journey had been difficult, it had also been worth it. He had made mistakes, but he had also learned some valuable lessons. He had learned that true success was not measured by wealth or power, but by the people you help and the difference you make in their lives. One afternoon, as Richard sat in his new apartment, he received a call from Mia's school principal. "Mr. Clark," the principal said, "I just wanted to let you know that Mia has been awarded a scholarship to one of the top universities in the country. We're all incredibly proud of her, and we couldn't be more excited about her future." Richard felt a lump form in his throat. He had always known that Mia had the potential for greatness, but hearing it from her school was something entirely different. "Thank you," Richard replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of her. She's worked incredibly hard, and she deserves this." As he hung up the phone, Richard looked over at Mia, who was sitting across the room, reading a book. She looked up and smiled, and Richard's heart swelled with pride. Mia had come so far, and he knew that her journey was just beginning. He had given her the foundation she needed, and now it was up to her to build her future. But no matter what, Richard knew that he would always be there to support her, just as he had promised. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Richard felt at peace. He had made the right choices, and he knew that the future was bright for both him and Mia. Months passed, and Richard's new life with Mia seemed to be falling into place. Mia had settled into her new school, excelling in every subject, and she had made friends who admired her for her intelligence and determination. She had come so far from the timid girl she once was. Richard could see the confidence growing in her, and it filled him with pride. As for Richard, he was learning what it truly meant to be a father, not just in title, but in action. He was present in Mia's life in ways he had never been with his own children before. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He was there for every school play, and he made it a point to spend quality time with Mia, talking to her about her dreams, her goals, and her future. It was a slow but steady process of building trust and connection. One day, As Richard sat in his living room, looking through some paperwork, Mia walked in, her eyes wide with excitement. "Guess what, Mr. Clark?" she said, nearly breathless. Richard looked up, a smile playing at his lips. "What is it, Mia?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "I got into my dream college. I'm going to be studying computer science at Stanford. I can't believe it." Richard stood up, his heart swelling with pride. He crossed the room in a few long strides and pulled her into a hug. "Mia, that's amazing. I knew you could do it." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she pulled away from the hug. I never thought I'd make it this far. Thank you for believing in me." Richard smiled warmly. "You did the work, Mia. You earned it. I'm just here to support you in every way I can." The next few weeks were filled with excitement and preparation. Mia's acceptance into Stanford was a dream come true, but it also brought a sense of finality. As much as Richard wanted to keep her close, he knew that she had to follow her own path, just as he had once done. He made sure that every detail was taken care of: college tuition, housing, books. Everything was ready for her to start this new chapter of her life. The day Mia left for Stanford was bittersweet. Richard drove her to the airport, their conversation light, but filled with meaning. "You're going to do great things, Mia," Richard said, his voice full of emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Mia smiled up at him, her eyes shining. With determination. "I won't let you down, Mr. Clark. I promise." As Richard watched her walk through security, he felt a lump form in his throat. He had given Mia the opportunity of a lifetime, but in doing so, he had also let go of the girl who had become like a daughter to him. As the plane took off, Richard felt a sense of loss, but also pride. He had watched Mia grow, and now, she was on her way to greatness. And though she was leaving, he knew that he would always be there for her, supporting her every step of the way. Meanwhile, back at the house, things had changed. The atmosphere was quieter, less tense, but there was still an underlying unease. Richard had not spoken to Rebecca in months, their marriage irreparably broken. He knew that there was no going back. But as time passed, he realized that he didn't need to look back. He had made the right choice. Mia's success was proof of that. She had changed his life, and in doing so, he had found a new sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but Richard knew that whatever challenges lay in store, he was ready to face them. He had a new purpose, a new family, and a future that was filled with hope and possibilities. Months went by, and the changes in Richard's life seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Mia was flourishing at Stanford, sending regular updates about her classes, new friends, and the things she was learning. Richard was immensely proud of her, but he couldn't ignore the feeling of emptiness that had begun to grow inside him. His relationship with Mia was the brightest spot in his life, but the rest of his world was still in pieces. His marriage to Rebecca had been over for months, and though the silence between them had become almost comfortable, it was clear that the fracture was irreversible. Rebecca had remained in the house, her presence a reminder of what once was, but it was no longer a home. Richard's life had been completely redefined by Mia's success. His entire perspective had shifted, and he found himself focusing more on the legacy he wanted to leave for her, not just as her benefactor, but as someone who could guide her through life. His business empire, once the most important thing in his world, now seemed less significant. But there were still moments when the weight of his past decisions hit him. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, staring out the window, he thought about the life he had left behind. The money, the power, the admiration. He had once craved all of it. But now, as he reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that true fulfillment had never come from those things. It had come from giving someone the chance to change their life. It had come from helping Mia see the future she deserved. As the phone rang, snapping him from his thoughts, he picked it up and answered, his voice calm. "Hello, Richard." The voice on the other end was familiar. It was his attorney. "Richard, we need to discuss the final terms of your divorce settlement with Rebecca. There's still a lot to sort out with the property and assets." Richard had been expecting the call, but it still made his heart tighten. "I understand. Let's get it over with," he replied. The divorce proceedings had been ongoing for some time, but it had been the least of Richard's worries. He knew that, despite everything, it was the right step for both of them. Rebecca had her own life to live, and so did he. But the thought of the legal papers and the cold finality of it all still made him uneasy. As the conversation continued, Richard found himself thinking back to a conversation he had had with Mia a few months ago. She had asked him if he regretted anything in his life. At the time, he had brushed the question off, saying that he had no regrets, that he had built a life he could be proud of. But now he wondered. Regret, he realized, wasn't about wishing for the past to be different. It was about understanding the lessons from the past and using them to shape a better future. The divorce was the final chapter in his marriage, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it would open up new opportunities for him to focus on the things that mattered. As the call ended, Richard sat back, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He was ready to move forward. He had done his part for Mia, but now it was time to rebuild the life that he truly wanted. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer defined by his wealth, his past mistakes, or his marriage. He was defined by the people he helped, the relationships he nurtured, and the future he wanted to build with Mia. And as he picked up the phone to call her, to hear about her latest accomplishments, he realized that he had already started building that future. A future filled with love, hope, and possibility. As Richard sat in his quiet apartment, reflecting on everything that had transpired, a sense of peace washed over him. He had been through so much, and yet, for the first time in years, he felt truly content. Mia's success was proof of everything he had fought for. She was thriving in college, her future filled with promise, and that was all that mattered to him now. He had given her a chance, and in doing so, he had found his own redemption. The months had not been easy. The divorce had been finalized, and while it was a painful process, Richard had accepted it as a necessary step. He no longer regretted his decision. He knew that his relationship with Rebecca was beyond repair, and now, he was free to live his life according to his own values. The focus had shifted from the empire he had built to the people he cared about. Mia was the heart of his world now, and as he made plans to visit her at Stanford, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had always worked hard, driven by ambition, but now he worked for something more meaningful. Mia's future was his legacy. On the day he arrived at the university to visit Mia, he was greeted with a smile that could light up a room. She had grown so much, not just in her academic achievements, but in her confidence and sense of self. Richard was in awe of how far she had come, and it made him proud to see the young woman she was becoming. They spent the day walking around campus, reminiscing about the old days, and talking about everything and anything. For the first time in a long while, Richard felt like he had a true family. As they sat in the campus cafe, Mia looked at her father with a smile that was equal parts grateful and determined. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "I don't think I could have made it here without you. You believed in me when no one else did, and that changed everything." Richard reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "You did the hard work, Mia. You've always had the potential. I just gave you the chance to prove it to yourself." Mia squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I won't forget what you've done for me, ever. I owe everything to you." Richard's heart swelled with emotion. He had never expected this kind of relationship, but it was more than he could have hoped for. As they continued their conversation, Richard realized that this was his real success, creating a bond with someone who truly mattered. In that moment, he knew that no matter what came next, he had made a difference. His life had purpose, not because of his wealth or his business achievements, but because of the love he had for his daughter and the impact he had on her life. As the day came to a close, and Richard drove back to his apartment, he felt a sense of fulfillment that was far greater than anything he had ever experienced. He had given Mia the chance to change her life, and in return, she had given him a life full of love, hope, and new possibilities. Richard smiled to himself, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would always be there for Mia, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. And in the quiet of his apartment that night, Richard realized that he had found everything he had been searching for all along. Discover an inspiring journey in this touching story about a billionaire's transformation through his relationship with his maid's daughter. The story unfolds with rich millionaire stories, capturing the profound change that takes place when Richard, a powerful man, starts prioritizing love, compassion, and personal growth over his empire. Through his experiences, this millionaire story highlights the significance of believing in others and providing opportunities, especially for those who are often overlooked. As the millionaire stories evolve, we see how a simple act of kindness changes lives, from the young girl's struggle to her incredible rise, and how it transforms Richard into a better version of himself. With every twist and turn, this millionaire story will inspire anyone who believes in the power of second chances and the impact one person can make in another's life. Witness the culmination of this journey, where the core of the millionaire stories is not just about wealth, but about the connections and relationships that shape our true legacy.